I spent, the last, I don't know how long, trying to get a spot in daycare. I mean, it is a blood sport. And talking to my friends who work in the industry, one thing that I found in Washington State that just horrified me is that the state of Washington has not published or printed the rules and regulations for daycare facilities in 6 years because the regulations change too frequently. I mean, I can't imagine running my auto shop with that quickly of a changing regulatory environment. And so you have this whole cottage industry that comes up of, consultants telling you how to adhere to the changing laws. What keeps a child safe has not fundamentally changed in the last 80 years, right? And so when you have this shifting landscape, it makes it really, really hard for entrepreneurs to feel like they should stay in the child care space. Since 2019, 1 in 10 child care facilities has permanently closed in the US. And it's really frustrating for me to hear people act like this is just a parent's issue or just a mom's issue. Let me tell you, as an employer, this is a big deal. This is a real problem. Because the most expensive option is the one where people just stay home and don't work, who would otherwise like to work. That hurts our economy. That hurts people's careers. And that's not the smart move. And so, wherever possible, working to ensure a smoother regulatory environment for these critical businesses, I think that's really important. Another critical role, we know that children learn as much under the age of 5 as they do from K-12. Their brains are developing more, in fact. But if you're looking for public service debt forgiveness for your student loans, you don't get it if you're working in the under 5 category. So it's ridiculous to me. I think we need to start doing the same kinds of support for educators in the K-12 world as the under 5 world. So I think those are some pragmatic steps we can take to start building back our supply of childcare.
Next question is from Rick. What are your plans for salmon and steelhead recovery?
Thank you for the question, Rick. So I know that's important. I mean, salmon, this is a cultural touchstone for us in Washington State and across the Northwest. And I think that it's important when we're thinking about salmon recovery that we have a broad view of how we get there. I think frequently we kind of get caught up in culvert size and not the larger issues of, the other important issues of ocean acidification and return rates. And so one thing that I think about a lot, and I think that Southwest Washington has a big role to play, one of the drivers of ocean acidification is plastic in our ocean. And what is the solution to plastic? Often, I believe it can be paper and cardboard. We did not have these problems in the 1950s in part because we were using a lot more paper and cardboard. What do we make in Southwest Washington? Paper and cardboard. I mean, we have the technology, ladies and gentlemen. We have the means, and opening back up these mills, getting more paper and cardboard back in the market. I think we can all, just do me a favor, the next time you're in the grocery store, go out and look at the laundry detergent. It's almost all coming in plastic jugs right now. That all came in cardboard boxes before. And so revitalizing our paper and cardboard industry is not just good for our forest thinning projects, it's not just good for our local mills, but it's also good for salmon and steelhead. It's also good for ocean acidification. It's also great for removing microplastics and endocrine disrupting hormones from our waterways. So I think, people coming from rural communities have to be creative in how we solve problems. And I think that's why we need more rural legislators and people working in many different industries working together to solve these problems.
The next question is from Carolyn. Will you cross the aisle for reasonable GOP bills?
Yes, absolutely. I don't care who's sponsoring the bill. I care what the impact of the bill is. And, if Marjorie Taylor Greene herself puts it forward, if it's a good bill, I'm going to get behind it. Because that's how we get away from this cult of personality. And so I mentioned that, I took a tough vote already. I was one of 3 Democrats to sign on to a bill condemning political violence against pregnancy birth centers and churches that were vandalized after Roe versus Wade. Living in a climate of increased political violence, we have to say it's always wrong. It is always wrong to break windows. So, thank you. I got a lot of eye rolls and head shaking and a lot of pressure. But I thought of you all. I thought of myself. I thought about what matters to my district. And so I appreciate you all for being who you are and being role models, many of you to me, and thank you.
Next question is from Michael. What are your thoughts about reducing federal debt and a balanced budget amendment?
Yeah, the national debt is a national security problem. This is something we've got to get under control. And I think often, we talk about revenue and we talk about expenses, but I also think it's important that we also consider how do we grow our economy, because that's another way that we can increase revenue is by having more small businesses, by having dollars circulate more within our local economies. So growing the economy is really important to me. I think we can do that by supporting small businesses. That's part of why I want to be on the Small Business Committee. But a large portion of our Social Security has got to be reformed. We've got to address this, and one of the ways that makes sense to most people who work for a living. So right now, you pay taxes on earnings you make under $147,000. That goes for your Social Security, right? Whatever you make over $147,000, that never gets taxed. And so some of the highest earners aren't paying the same ratio. And just removing that cap would solve 80% of the solvency issues for Social Security. And that goes a long ways in addressing our national deficit.
Next question is from Mike. President Biden is doing his best to put oil companies out of business. Do you support his efforts?
We have got to have domestic energy supply, right? And in the political chaos in Ukraine and Russia only demonstrates that more. Energy independence is geopolitical security. So, right now, that's just the reality that oil is part of that. I also think it's important, and I think it's interesting to talk about this in Washington State, where we have been historic leaders on renewable energy, on hydro, to continue to be leaders in renewable energy. And I think there's very exciting things happening in fusion right now. I think hydro continues to be really, really important to our menu of options for energy supply. And the other thing that I'd like to bring up is right now there are almost 9,000 permits for oil and gas that have been issued but haven't been exercised. And so there is a lot of availability out there for more, it's already permitted production. But the market hasn't bared that out right now with the fluctuations. And so So I think it's important that we not have too heavy of a, let's not ascribe to, the president what is actually market fluctuations going on.
Next question is from Kevin. Last year, Congressman Blumenauer introduced legislation to support gorge-wide transit on both sides of the river for communities and recreationists. Would you work with Congressman Blumenauer to improve gorge transit?
I have not looked at that specific bill. I am happy to look at that. Transportation is critical and infrastructure is critical. I think we've seen a real level of disinvestment in critical infrastructure, and it's small businesses rely on it. We all rely on it to get to work, to get home, and so it's important that we have a reliable infrastructure system in place that is flexible, that is adaptable to the changing needs of our communities. So happy to look that one up.
Next question is from George. What are your thoughts about the Republican plan to hold the debt ceiling hostage when they drove the debt up by $7 trillion under Trump?
Yeah, so the debt ceiling, we kind of touched on this a bit, but you get into really chaotic, unpredictable outcomes when you start messing around with the debt ceiling. I really